Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Brian T. Jackett. I am so pleased that you've joined us today. We're going to be learning about how to expand your knowledge with graph connectors, specifically with Microsoft 365 Copilot. A lot of great content that we're going to be sharing today, so let's dive in. So what are we going to learn about today? Well, we're going to learn a little bit about how can we integrate external non-Microsoft 365 data for Copilot for Microsoft 365. We want to be able to reason over that, ask questions, do summarizations, lots of ways for us to be able to interact with that content. We're also going to talk about how we can acquire or build your own custom graph connectors. So we'll give you some tips and tricks in terms of how you can actually go do that, as well as a number of different resources that will be very helpful for you. In terms of our agenda today, again, we'll give you a little bit of an overview of Copilot for Microsoft 365 extensibility, a couple of different options we have available to us, but we're specifically going to be looking at Microsoft Graph Connectors. So for that, we'll give you an overview of this, what's available on the platform, also give you some demos. Really helps to be able to see this in action. So we'll show you what that looks like in some of our dev environments. And lastly, we'll wrap up with a couple of different tips for you, whether you're an administrator or a developer, ways for you to get started for things so you can get the most value out of this as you go forward in your own development with Copilot for Microsoft 365. Now, to set the stage for today, we really want to talk about what are the different extensibility options that you have with Copilot for Microsoft 365. And there's really going to be two of them that are going to be available to us. We have plugins up at the top on here, and we also have graph connectors down the middle of the slide. So for today's purposes, we are primarily focusing on graph connectors. But what we want to really focus for you is, in terms of the interaction for this, as an end user, I can be able to send in prompts into Copilot for Microsoft 365. Plugins help us with the ability to do actions, other ways for us to interact with the content. For graph connectors, though, we're actually bringing that data in so we can be able to reason over this down actually at the data layer. So whether you're talking to Microsoft 365 data sources or you're going into external content, such as today's topic, we're able to reason over that with our Copilot system. And in the middle, our orchestration is actually going to give us the abilities to figure out what's the right source for me, whether it's calling into a plugin or calling into a Microsoft Graph Connector. Now, rather than me talking to you about all that you can do with Copilot for Microsoft 365 extensibility, let's actually take a look at this live with some demos. A lot of great things that we want to show you, so let's actually dive in now. All right, so let's take a look at what can we actually do with Graph Connectors inside of Copilot for Microsoft 365. So here I'm actually inside of Teams. I'm taking a look at Microsoft 365 Chat. In this scenario, I could actually be doing this in other areas as well. Could be doing it inside of the Bing app or inside of the Microsoft365.com or even Copilot to Microsoft.com as well. First things first, let's take a look at just a simple kind of query a user might come in with. So let's say, what is my travel policy? So I'll pass this question into Copilot, and it's actually going to take a look at across multiple different sources. This might be content inside of Exchange emails, inside of SharePoint files, inside of Teams chats. In this case, I happen to find a match for this, and Copilot's going to respond back with my information from this. In this case, it's actually going against a ServiceNow knowledge base article. And here you can see that I actually found my travel policy, talks about how I can extend my trip for 7 days, and more information about this. If you take a look down at the references, you'll see that it actually came back from ServiceNow as well. And if I click onto that content, it'll actually bring me into the source information for this as well. Now, not only can we take a look at things based on kind of the title for them, I could also ask some more questions about the content inside of the actual document as well. So here, let's follow this up with, how much can I expense on food if traveling to Australia? Always wanted to go there, never gotten a chance, but hey, if I ever do, what can I actually do for expenses on this? So again, Copilot's going to take a look at the different data sources for this. It should be able to find inside of that same document that I had out there, there's more information about this. And again, I'm not searching on the title of the content out there. It's actually going to be questioning the content inside of that document as well. And here you go. See that Copilot was able to reason back, take a look at the reference for this. That is that same document, but actually found out the answer to my question coming from that. In this case, my daily food stipend is going to be $200. That's great. A lot of stuff I can go and get for breakfast, lunch, and dinner out there. All right, let's actually flip gears a little bit. I actually want to learn some information. I'm maybe a new developer, I'm a new business analyst, and I want to be able to find more about Markdown. I've heard about this from folks, but I actually don't know what it is. So let's ask a question. What can you tell me about Markdown files? Now in this case, I actually have indexed some enterprise website content. This is coming from a public source, but this actually could be something that's going to be secured as well. So it depends on how you want to pull that kind of information in. In this case though, Copilot's going to go and find out that kind of Markdown file information, and I should be able to find some hits in terms of the different kind of content that I have out there. Here you go, see that actually bringing back information, telling me about what are Markdown files, the different extensions for this. And if I look at the references, you'll see this is coming from some of our sample galleries. So great way for me to be able to actually go and find that content, no matter whether it's inside of M365 or it's coming from somewhere else. Another little useful tip for you, notice that down at the bottom, we have these little pills. These can give you more information, some additional suggestions, other ways to kind of continue on. And again, because it's coming from those external data sources, it is going to be personalized for you based on what you see in those locations. For our last scenario, we're actually going to flip over to a issues list. I might be someone who is a PM, I'm a content author. I want to find out what's the latest that's happening from our folks in the community. In this case, I actually happen to have a GitHub repository where I'm storing those issues. Let's take a look at some samples we can actually pull back from that. So I'll say, show me issues on OneDrive, assigned to one of my teammates. This is Jason, that's his GitHub handle out there. So as I query for this content, again, Copilot's going to be searching over multiple different kind of data sources. In this case, GitHub is going to be one of those things. Should be able to find back those issues coming back that are related to OneDrive, as well as being filtered for things that are assigned to Jason. So great way to be able to do multiple filters for the content and still be able to get that back with all the different references to the actual source content. Here you can see that Copilot's responding back with all the individual items, and I even have all the references to those GitHub issues as well. In the last area, let's say that I want to do some generative AI. I want to be able to draft an email, let's say for our content review team. So I'm going to take the same thing that we just saw, and I'm actually going to copy and paste in a little bit longer of a query. So here is, draft me an email with a bullet list of issues with OneDrive, modified by Jason again. Suggest specific next steps for our content review team on how to close them out. So we're taking that content that we're already bringing back from our Graph connector, but this time I've actually got some additional instructions for Copilot to be able to do, again, drafting an email for this. So you'll see that the actual outline for this, again, it's kind of that email format. And then at the bottom, I should see some specific next steps for our content review team on how they can actually proceed with this. Again, this is kind of our first draft of that email. I can actually take this, copy and paste it into Outlook or your preferred email client of choice, and away you go. Again, this is a great way to see how can I save myself 5, 10, maybe 30 minutes on a daily basis. Some very quick and easy wins that you can see being able to integrate Graph connectors with Copilot for Microsoft 365. So some great things for us to see all around. Great, so we actually got to see what does it look like to be able to use your own Graph connectors inside of Copilot. What did we actually learn from that? Well, let's take a step back now on here. When we're talking about extensibility for Copilot for Microsoft 365, again, we have different ways that we can be able to interact with this. On the left-hand side, you can see additional skills that can be added into Copilot. That's really where our plugins are going to be shining for that. But for today, we're really talking about the bottom on here, which is expanding the organizational context for Copilot. With this, Graph connectors will be able to give us that additional data, additional different sources that we can reason over, and we can do a lot of different capabilities. As you saw in the demos, we had things like keyword search and retrieval. We will do some summarization or Q&A of content, even using generative AI to be able to build things like emails or other things for our users to be more productive. Always, as we talk about this though, we are making sure that we use security, compliance, and governance to reason over all that information, making sure that we only have access to the data that the user has access to as well. So if you're looking for files or chats or other things like that, if you don't have access to it, you will not be able to bring that back inside of Copilot. And as some additional bonuses for Graph connectors, do note that this is going to be available to you in other experiences as well. So if you want to be able to see this inside of Search, inside of the Viva platform, Context IQ, and more, we'll touch on this as we get into our overview for Graph connectors. Now for the administrators out there, it would be very helpful to know, well, what all can I actually be able to ingest with this? Again, this is not going to be an exhaustive list of all the different Graph connectors that are out there, but gives you a little bit of a kind of example for this. You can see in here a number of different platforms that are available to us. These are going to be available from a couple different sources. Could be that you're coming from a Microsoft-built Graph connector. So we've actually gone out and built around 18 different Graph connectors. These are really based on customer demand. So we talked to our customers. They told us, hey, here are ones that we would like to be able to use. So first-party ones are one kind of area you can see for this. We also have a number of third-party Graph connectors that have also been built into the ecosystem, roughly about 200 different ones that are out there. You can see the full listing inside of our Graph connectors gallery down at the bottom, aka.ms/Graph connectors gallery. Those are going to be available from the various folks, whether they're ISV or SI partners, folks who are in our ecosystem that want to be able to bring that data in, make it available for you as users. Now, let's take another step back and we'll say, what can we actually do with Graph connectors as an overview for the platform? Really, the idea here is that I want to be able to ingest that external data to be able to surface it inside of native Microsoft 365 experiences. There's actually a number of different places for that, but let's actually start down at the bottom on here. First things first, when we talk about that external data sources, what could those be? This could be a on-prem file share. This could be a line of business application, could be a third-party SaaS service, a lot of different places for us. Doesn't really matter where that data is at. As long as we can make a request against Microsoft Graph, that's really the way we're going to be able to bring that data in. On top of this, we also have a number of different things for our semantic matching of content. So when you, as a user, are searching for content, it is not limited to just simple lexical queries or keyword queries. So if I search for Project Contoso, I can actually know what that actually means in other types of scenarios. So being able to find out that's a code name for other projects, or do some of that natural language processing to be able to understand that content better. In terms of the different experiences where you can actually light up Microsoft Graph connectors, you'll see a number of these across the top on here. We have areas that are already generally available, as well as a few that are in preview. In terms of GA experiences, you'll see things like Microsoft Search. So this can be inside of SharePoint, inside of Bing, inside of the Microsoft365.com, or also the Microsoft 365 app, where I can see content recommendations, recently accessed items, and similar. So no longer is that being just for content inside of M365. This can also be for those external data sources as well. As we move to the right, we can see some of our preview experiences. Could be for the Vivo platform in terms of Vivo topics, as well as Context IQ, which is a way for us to do a deep link to that content, again, whether it's inside of M365 or with our external content. And then lastly, we have our newest experience on here, which is for Copilot for Microsoft 365. Again, our ability to have that conversational AI, that way for you to be able to interact with content no matter where it may exist at. Now, looking at the architecture for how are these things actually built, there's really going to be kind of two main patterns that you'll see for syncing that content inside of Microsoft Graph. You'll see we have scheduled on the left, and on the right-hand side, the event-driven kind of model. With scheduled, think about this as more of a pull model. I may have content that I want to sync on a daily basis, hourly, every 5 minutes. Whatever that schedule is, we're really reaching out to bring that content in, and we're going to look for things for creations, updates, deletes, and similar. So every time we do that kind of batch process, we'll bring in the latest information on that schedule. This is really appropriate for content where it doesn't need to be up to date in terms of real time. I just need to know that I have a reference to that content, and then I can deep link back to the source to actually get the most relevant information that's going to be real time for that. Compare this to on the right-hand side, we've got our event-driven model. This is more of kind of a push model. The idea here is I actually need to have things that are going to be near real-time updated. So as soon as an item is created, as soon as something changes on it, is deleted, whatever else, I want to actually have that inside of Microsoft Graph so I can then empower it in all the different experiences. With this, we'll typically hook into existing sets of workflows that you may have. Could be a trigger, could be a database script, could be a webhook, some kind of way. Basically hook into that existing workflow that you have. And at the end of that, kind of the tail end for it, basically just push in whatever the changes are over to Microsoft Graph. Now, in terms of the actual building blocks of what goes into a Graph connector, there's really three main components, and we'll talk about them here. The first is we have a connection. You can really think about this as a logical container for all the other elements that appear on the page on here. With this, I have a Microsoft Graph API, I can go in to find what the connection is, the different settings, the description, title, and so forth, and it'll contain the other items that we talk about on here. Next, we have the schema. And this is really going to be a flat set of properties, metadata, that I can define for my connector. This really defines what are the things that I'm going to be bringing in. In addition to those properties, metadata, and so forth, we also have sets of unstructured content that you can store in here as well. So if you're working with a file-based or a text-rich set of data sources, you can also ingest that content, which can be very helpful for Copilot to be able to reason over. Lastly, with this, you can also see that there are things like our semantic labels, our aliases. This really helps us from an ingestion standpoint to know what is the most important content for this, how can I actually surface to the user so that when it comes time for them to ask questions, do summarization and similar, we have access to that information to be able to bring back for them. And the last element you'll see for a building block on here is permissions. When we are talking to the external data, sometimes there's going to be things like permissions on there. And in the case of Graph connectors, we can define these as access control lists or ACLs. These can be either an allow or a deny list, and you can tie it back to users, groups, everyone in the tenant, or even something special where we call an external group. We'll touch on this more in a later slide. Now, when it comes time for that schema definition, what all goes into that? If you are deploying out-of-the-box, a first-party kind of Microsoft Graph connector, there are a couple things that are going to be predefined for you. If you're a developer building your own custom one, you actually get to define what does that schema look like. And in that schema, you're going to have a couple different things like our property names. Again, what are the different attributes that we want to be able to ingest? You can define these search attributes for this. If you are integrating into the Microsoft Search experience, or even some areas that apply to Copilot, we want to be able to define what things are going to be queryable, retrievable, refinable, and similar. We also have semantic labels. These are a predefined set of about 12 different labels that Microsoft has provided to really tell the indexing engine, here are the most important things. You can think of these as the title, the URL back to the source information, created by, last modified date, last modified by, and similar. So these are really common kind of industry standard items that the indexer is going to need to know about in terms of what is available for the index engine to be able to bring back for the users. So again, with the ones that are built by Microsoft, we've actually predefined what those semantic labels are. If you're building your own custom graph connector, you can define those for us to help us understand, again, title, URL, icon, and similar things like that. There's also aliases available to you as well. So as an administrator, sometimes the definition or the name of something in the source system may not match what the actual end user or you as an admin would expect it to be. So ways for us to basically give a alternate name to content that exists inside of there, just really for the property names out there. Now, one important part that we really want to cover on here, especially for Copilot scenarios, when you are defining what are the different kind of attributes for those search attributes on here, do note that the searchable attribute, that is really what's going to be used by Copilot, that orchestrator, to tell us here are the things that I want to be able to match against the user's prompt. So when the user actually submits a question in or some other kind of content to Copilot, this will really give us that flavor for what are the things that need to be able to match back against that. Now, I mentioned that we're going to talk a little bit about Graph Connector permissions. On this, there's some great things that you can see for how can actually control who can access what kind of content out there. Now, by default, there are three main areas we can tie that kind of permissions back to. You're going to need to have a Microsoft Entra, formerly called Azure AD. You need to have either a user, a group, or what we call a external group. With the Entra ID user, again, you can apply or allow or deny list. This will really tell us who has access to that kind of content. If you specify an Entra ID group, this does take away some of the different maintenance that you may need to have for this. So as a user, if I'm part of this group, I no longer need to maintain kind of the list of who's in that group or whatnot. Instead, I just say, hey, here's the group that I want this to have permissions for this, or people that I do not want to have access to this. And that can alleviate some of the administrative maintenance for these items. The last area in here is external groups. And the idea with this is that if you're building to some kind of system where it's not based on Microsoft Entra ID as the source for identity, in this scenario, you can actually define what do you want that membership group to look like. In some of our cases, we see people using this as role-based access. Maybe they've got our profile property. Here are the people who are executives. Here's our designers. Here's our project managers. So you can do that kind of as that profile-based. Or you could even have some kind of existing set of membership permissions that are completely outside of Entra ID. So for you, it's really up to you how you want to define what those external groups do. But do note that for any of these kind of scenarios, you will need to keep those up to date to make sure that only the correct users that have access to the content or who do not have access, that those apply through as you're going into working with these inside of Copilot. You can see the link down at the bottom of the page where you can read more about this. Lots of great information for you in our documentation. All right, so we've learned a little bit about what we can do with graph connectors, how they can integrate into Copilot. What are the next steps for you? Well, if you're an administrator, there's a couple of quick, easy things that you can do to make sure that you're informed and that you're able to go and be successful with this. First things first that I'd highly recommend, definitely go take a look at the Graph Connector gallery. See what are the different connectors that are already available out to you. If you think these are ones that are already pre-built by Microsoft or by different partners out there, ISV partners who built them for folks, basically going to their own data sources. Could be SI partners who are building this as a consultancy or services company, being able to provide it to other users. The next step would be take a look at stage rollout. The idea here is that when you are rolling this out into your tenant, what we really want to be mindful of is maybe I only have like 5 users that I want to be able to test this first before I actually go to every single user in the tenant. With stage rollout, we can actually limit so that that Graph Connector content, it will only show for just those set of users. So think of this almost kind of like a pre-validation, another way for us to get just a sample set of users seeing this. And that'll actually apply to everything within inside of the tenant. So inside of the Microsoft Search experience, as well as for Copilot. Great way for us to be able to test things early with just those limited set of test users. And also start to think about what are the different use cases, the prompts, what are the other kind of scenarios that you want to be able to test with this. Really helps to have some sample scenarios where, hey, I'm working with a order management system, working with some knowledge base articles, working with some intranet website pages. What kind of things are users going to be searching for? What kind of groups or different scenarios would you see making the most use of this? By planning those things out ahead, this can really help from, again, you've got the connection set up, you've got the data being ingested. Now, who's actually going to go out there and test that, whether it's through stage rollout or through some kind of means? So think about those things ahead of time, and that can really help you in terms of getting up to speed as quickly as possible once you have access. Now, for the developers in the room, there are some additional things as well to be mindful of this. Again, if you're building your own custom graph connector, these are going to be things that can really help you from an improved relevance. We're not only looking, again, at things like this, the lexical matching of content out there for kind of keyword searches, we also want to be able to do that semantic matching as well. So when it comes time for being able to define the name for your connector or the description for this, make sure it's something that's going to be human readable. This helps you not only from an administrator, again, being able to know what content source is going to where, but also for the users who maybe want to do filter for a specific kind of content. There are ways that we're looking into to be able to make that more approachable for them so they can be able to find that content the way that they want to. Also, when it comes to the schema, we talked about this on a previous slide, it does help to apply as many of those semantic labels as possible. So some of the key ones, again, title, URL, and also the icon URL, so you can actually see, hey, here's the different experience. People are very visual. They like to see what's the actual thing that I'm going back against. Also, when you're thinking about your Copilot scenarios, make sure that you set those schema properties as searchable for the ones that are going to be used basically inside of users' prompts. So again, work together with your administrators or your end users, knowing what are the different kind of questions they might ask for, or what are the different pieces of metadata that would be helpful for them to filter against. So very, very helpful out there. And lastly on here is also make sure that you fill in the content element actually on the graph connected items. This is going to be that rich text representation of content, so it allows us to be able to do that text matching of content. Again, if I've got a file, if I've got a wiki article, a news page, something like that, having the body of that kind of content inside of the content element will really help us from that rich text matching of content that's out there. You can take a look at the bottom of the page on here. We do have a link for more information about being able to do this from the developer standpoint, so very helpful information you can take a look at on there. Now, to close things out, we're actually going to show you a couple different resources that are going to be very helpful for you. So if you are a developer, again, you can take a look at our developer docs, aka.ms/graph connectors API. For administrators, that graph connector gallery that we talked about, aka.ms/graph connectors gallery. Again, another way for us to be able to get quick up and start with things, you can take a look at our quick start. This will actually walk you through building a graph connector from scratch. So you can take a look at some sample code for this, as well as some step-by-step processes for this, aka.ms/graph connectors quick start. We also published very recently a learning module on this. So if you'd like to learn more about how graph connectors function, what kind of ways can you use them in your environment, and be able to step through some different exercises for this, great way to get some training on this. You can find more about that and the link on here for learn.microsoft.com. And lastly, you can take another look at a video that we have also published. This is another great one for being able to take a look at extending Copilot for M365 with graph connectors. Feel free to share that out and take a look at that in your own environments as well. And with that, thank you so much for attending today. I really appreciate your time and attention. Hopefully you learned some very valuable information, basically being able to work with graph connectors inside of Copilot for Microsoft 365. Thank you and have a great day.